We're now standing in Water Lane. Now, Water Lane got its name quite simply because in the early days, this was the River Thames. You used to go all the way back the way we're going shortly. But as they built the inner wall, so they pushed the river that way. They then pushed it that way even further as they built the outer wall. Now, one of the ways of doing it was to raise the bed of the river some 12 to 15 feet to the height that this road is today. But they've kept the name Water Lane. Now, normally where we stand when we're doing this part is over there. But for obvious reasons, because of all the scaffolding and everything else, we can't actually stand there. So we're going to talk about it, then you can have a look at what's over there before we move on, okay? Because what's over there are some very famous gates. They're known as Traitors' Gate. Now, originally, they were known as Watergate. Oh, come on, it's worth more than that. It's nobody getting jealous. Just because we had that first as well, it's nobody getting jealous. Known as Watergate, purely because they were the gates that led directly onto the River Thames. It's no good having stores, no good having prisoners. Bring them through the streets of London, stores are stolen, prisoners are up to escape. It's much better to bring them the safe way. Now, in those days, the safe way was by way of the river. You bring them by way of the river, you need a decent gate to let them in. You'll see it later on. It's over there, originally known as Watergate. But as times passed, all the prisoners who came through those gates were enemies of the king or queen of the day. They were enemies of the country. So it made sense to change the name from Watergate to Traitors' Gate. Now, as the prisoners arrived, the gates opened, the boat come through, and from there the prisoner would be met by the yeoman jailer. Now, from there, he'd be escorted to his cell. Now, where were all their cells? Well, to understand that, you need to remember what I said right at the very beginning. Welcome to Her Majesty's Royal Palace and Fortress, the Tower of London. Not a prison. Tower of London was never designed and never meant to be a prison. Although the first prisoner came here in the year 1100, and the last one left in 1941 that we had anything to do with. Didn't do too bad, did he? So where were all the prisoners kept? Well, in every room, in every tower that you go into today. In every room, in every tower that you can't go into today. At some time or another has been used to house prisoners. When prisoners weren't in those rooms, they'd be occupied by important friends, guests, visitors of the king or queen of the day. Multi-purpose, you could say. Now, one of the most famous of all our towers is hidden behind this scaffolding. It's not the round one, it's the one slightly this side, it's the Bloody Tower. Now, originally it was known as the Garden Tower. It was known as the Garden Tower because it overlooked the Lieutenant's garden. But as times passed, more and more crimes, murders, assassinations, but not executions. No executions took place in any of the towers, but some of the murders took place there. So they slowly changed the name from the Garden Tower to the Tower of Blood. And eventually it was shortened to the Bloody Tower. Now, they say the most terrible crime of all to be committed here in the tower was committed in the Bloody Tower. And that is the alleged murders. Now, we say alleged because the people who confessed to these murders were not believed. And that is the alleged murders of the two young princes, Edward V and his younger brother Richard, the Duke of York. They say the alleged murders took place there, their bodies being taken down the steps leading to the Wakefield Tower. Now, the Wakefield Tower is the round one. You can see the other side of the scaffolding. Now, that part would make sense because of where they were found. And they were discovered 191 years after they were last seen entering the Bloody Tower. They were discovered by workmen during the reign of King Charles II. Now, these workmen were carrying out work on the south side of the White Tower. Shortest distance from here to there used to be via the Wakefield Tower. Now, these workmen broke through the wall and they discovered a casket. They brought it out, opened it up and looked inside and found what they believed to be the remains of two young people. So the king was informed. He was convinced they were those of the two young princes. So he's brought together all the experts of the day. They've all examined these remains, and they've all agreed that, yes, they were those of the two young princes. So the king ordered that another casket be made. They say it was designed by Sir Christopher Wren. They were placed in there and taken with full honours to Westminster Abbey and buried in Innocents' Corner, where they remain to this day. Sir Walter Raleigh, you've all heard of Sir Walter Raleigh, yeah? So he was a great seafarer man, a great explorer. Now when he came here, it made sense. He came by way of the river. But as he came through those gates, he came here under sentence of death. He was then turned round to life imprisonment. He was to spend 13 years of his life as a prisoner in the bloody tower. Now for the first 5 years, he had his wife with him. During that time, his wife had at least one child. Life wasn't that bad as a prisoner after all, was it? Or was it? We don't know what his wife is like, but that's probably a different story. Oh dear. All you men, you chickens. Standing next to the wife. I ain't after that one. I ain't getting a dig in the ribs for that. I'll after myself later. But he also found time to write a book. Now that book is called A History of the World. There's an early edition up there for you to have a look at later. I'll show you how to get in there later. But while you're in there, also have a look at the furniture. The furniture is probably not the sort of furniture you would expect prisoners to have. Very, very posh, especially for the period. But what you've got to remember, that the prisoners who were imprisoned here were not criminals, murderers, or thieves. They were what we would very loosely class today as political prisoners. They were here for their views. They spoke out against. They plotted against the king or queen of the day. Look at it more as being under house arrest. Now, if you go by certain movies and certain books, everybody who was imprisoned here was tortured. In reality, not the case. Before anybody could be tortured, a royal warrant had to be issued. Now, our records tell us there was no more than 50 royal warrants ever issued. Again, if you go by the same movies and same books, everybody who was imprisoned here had his head chopped off. Once again, not the case. Only about 10 or 15% of all the prisoners who ever came here were actually executed. Now, okay, that's not very good if you're one of the 10 or 15%. But look on the bright side. That means 85 to 90% would eventually walk free. And for the majority of them, and I'll say again, the majority of them, they have lived in the sort of conditions you will find in the bloody tower. They had about all the good furniture they wanted, all the good food, all the good wine, their families to visit them, their servants. Yes, their servants to wait on them. All they had to do was pay for it. They were allowed to spend their own money on their own comforts. The only thing their money was never going to buy them was their freedom until the time was right. What we're going to do now, we're going to go that way. You're going to have a very quick look. Hang on, whoa, you don't even know where you're going yet, hang on. I don't know where I'm going, so how do you do this? Hang on. You're going to have a quick look at Traitors Gate, then we're going to go left underneath the archway of the bloody tower. As you go through the archway, have a quick look up, have a look at the second portcullis. This one weighs well over 3 tons. Then we're going all the way up the steps onto the village green. Try and keep up, can I get bored?